Who is the most dangerous man in the world? It is not the richest man. It is not the strongest. It is not the loudest voice in the room. The most dangerous man is the one who can no longer be controlled by what most people desperately chase. A man who does not beg for attention, who does not fear being alone, who does not betray his principles just to be accepted. Because the moment a man no longer depends on applause, approval, or constant validation, something extraordinary happens. He becomes impossible to manipulate. The promises that tempt others no longer tempt him. The criticism that breaks others no longer defines him. The rejection that once terrified him no longer controls his choices. That kind of freedom is rare, and rare things are always misunderstood. Some people will mistake his silence for arrogance. Others will mistake his calm for weakness. But beneath that quiet exterior is a man who has discovered a truth that most people spend their entire lives searching for. Hello everyone, welcome to the Magnetic Masculinity channel. In this video, you'll discover why the man who needs the least often possesses the greatest strength, why inner freedom is more powerful than any form of dominance, and how letting go of emotional dependence can transform the way you live, lead, and earn genuine respect. Because the day nothing external owns your peace is the day you become truly unstoppable. Now let's get started. Part 1. Every chain begins with a need. Every person who has ever controlled another understood one simple truth. If they can discover what you cannot live without, they can influence your decisions. It has always been this way. Some men are controlled by money, others by status, others by praise, others by the fear of being rejected. The chain may look different, but the principle is always the same. The more desperately you need something outside yourself, the easier it becomes for that thing, or the people who possess it, to shape your behavior. This is why so many men unknowingly give away their freedom, not because someone takes it by force, but because they trade it away one compromise at a time. They stay silent when they should speak. They abandon their values to fit in. They tolerate disrespect because they are afraid of losing approval. They remain in places that drain their spirit simply because walking away feels more frightening than staying. None of these choices happen overnight. They happen quietly, so quietly that many men never notice the moment they stop living according to their own principles and started living according to someone else's expectations. The strongest men eventually discover a difficult truth. Freedom is not measured by how much you own. It is measured by how little owns you. The man who cannot be bought by compliments, cannot be manipulated by criticism. The man who does not depend on constant attention cannot be controlled by someone else's silence. The man who has built his identity on character instead of circumstances carries a strength that is difficult to shake. This does not mean he has no desires. It does not mean he has stopped loving people or pursuing meaningful goals. It simply means that his peace no longer has a price. He wants many things, but he refuses to surrender himself in order to obtain them. And perhaps that is what makes him so powerful, because the world has very little leverage over the man who has learned that nothing outside himself is worth losing his integrity. That is where true strength begins. Not in having everything, but in knowing exactly what you will never sell to get it. Part 2. The man who cannot be controlled is the man who has nothing to prove. There is a quiet confidence that cannot be purchased. It cannot be inherited, and it cannot be faked for very long. It is born the day a man realizes he has nothing left to prove. For most of life, we are taught to collect symbols of success: a better career, a bigger house, a higher salary, more admiration, more recognition, more victories. There is nothing wrong with pursuing these things. The problem begins when they become the only reason you believe you matter. Because the moment your identity depends on what you possess, you begin living in fear of losing it. You protect your image instead of your character. You defend your reputation instead of your principles. You become exhausted trying to maintain a version of yourself that exists only in the eyes of other people. But then life teaches a lesson that no book can fully explain. Everything external is temporary. Money can disappear. Status can fade. Beauty changes. Positions are replaced. Even the people you love may one day walk a different path. If your entire identity is built on things that can be taken away, then your peace will always be fragile. The strongest men understand this before life is forced to teach it through suffering. That is why they invest more in character than in appearance, more in discipline than in reputation, more in wisdom than in applause. When a man no longer feels compelled to prove his value every time he enters a room, his presence begins to change. He listens more than he speaks. He chooses his battles carefully. He no longer wastes energy arguing with people determined to misunderstand him, not because he lacks confidence, but because confidence has freed him from the need to win every conversation. The world often mistakes this for indifference. It is not. It is self-mastery. It is the quiet strength of a man who knows that his worth does not rise with compliments, nor fall with criticism. Because the man who has nothing to prove is no longer chasing validation. He is building a life that speaks for itself, and that is precisely what makes him so difficult to control. Before we continue, take a quiet moment and ask yourself this. What is the one thing you fear losing the most? Because the answer to that question may also reveal the one thing that has the greatest power over your life. If this conversation is challenging the way you've always seen strength, subscribe to the channel. Here, we don't chase empty motivation. We explore timeless principles that help men build unshakable character, emotional discipline, and the kind of confidence that cannot be taken away by success or failure. Now let's continue, because the next lesson reveals the hidden difference between a man who merely appears powerful and the man who is truly impossible to control. Part 3. The greatest power is freedom from fear. People often misunderstand what makes a man dangerous. They imagine aggression, dominance, control, the ability to intimidate others. But life teaches a very different lesson. The most powerful man is rarely the loudest one. He is the one who has made peace with the things most people spend their lives trying to avoid. He has accepted that not everyone will admire him. Not every opportunity will belong to him. Not every relationship will last forever. And because he has accepted these truths, fear slowly loses its grip on him. Think about how many decisions are quietly controlled by fear. The fear of rejection, the fear of failure, the fear of criticism, the fear of being alone, the fear of disappointing others. These fears rarely shout. They whisper. They convince a man to stay silent when he should speak, to remain where he no longer belongs, to chase people who have already chosen to leave, to sacrifice his principles in exchange for temporary comfort. For years, he may believe he is making practical decisions. Only later does he realize that many of them were made simply to avoid discomfort. Then one day, something changes. He stops asking, "What if I lose?" and begins asking, "What kind of man will I become if I keep living in fear?" That question changes everything. Because courage is not born the day fear disappears. Courage is born the day your values become more important than your fears. From that moment on, rejection no longer destroys your confidence. Failure no longer defines your identity. Criticism no longer decides your direction. They still hurt, they still challenge you, but they no longer own you. This is why the man who appears to need nothing often seems so calm. It is not because life has become easy. It is because he has stopped negotiating with fear every time he must make an important decision. His peace no longer depends on perfect outcomes. It depends on knowing that he remained faithful to his principles. And there is something deeply unsettling, yet deeply admirable about a man who cannot be manipulated by fear. Because once fear loses its authority, no promise can easily tempt him. No threat can easily break him. No opinion can easily redirect him. He becomes dangerous not to the people around him, but to every chain that once kept him from becoming the man he was meant to be. Part 4. The world changes when you stop asking it for permission. There is a quiet shift that happens when a man no longer needs the world to approve of him. At first, almost nothing around him changes. He still faces challenges. He still experiences disappointment. He still loses opportunities and watches people come and go. But something far more important has changed. His response. He no longer reacts to every opinion as though it were a verdict on his worth. He no longer feels compelled to explain every decision to people who have never carried his burdens. He no longer wastes precious energy trying to convince those who have already chosen not to understand him. Instead, he protects something much more valuable: his peace. Most people spend their lives trying to control everything outside themselves. They try to control how others see them, how others speak about them, how others respond to them. But the harder they try, the more frustrated they become. The wise man eventually discovers that control begins in a different place, not with the world, but with himself. He cannot control another person's respect, but he can choose whether he behaves in a respectable way. He cannot control another person's loyalty, but he can remain loyal to his own principles. He cannot prevent criticism, but he can decide whether criticism deserves a place in his mind. This realization gives him a kind of freedom that cannot be purchased. He becomes slower to anger, quicker to forgive, more careful with his words, more intentional with his time. Not because he has become passive, but because he has learned that every unnecessary reaction is an invitation to surrender his inner balance. There is something undeniably powerful about a man who refuses to let every insult become a battle. He understands that attention is one of the most valuable currencies he possesses, and he refuses to spend it on people, arguments, or distractions that add nothing to the life he is trying to build. That is why his silence feels different. It is not the silence of weakness. It is the silence of discipline. The silence of a man who has learned that not every fight deserves his strength. Because the man who chooses his battles wisely usually wins the ones that truly matter. Part 5. The man who needs the least owns the most valuable thing of all. At the end of the day, the most dangerous man is not the one who has the greatest power over others. It is the one who has gained power over himself. He no longer wakes up trying to impress the world. He wakes up trying to become a little wiser than he was yesterday. He no longer measures success by how many people admire him. He measures it by whether he remained faithful to his values when life became difficult. That is a victory no one can take away. There was a time when he believed happiness could be found in recognition, possessions, or status, but experience taught him a quieter truth. Everything you own can disappear. Everything people say about you can change. Even the people you love may one day choose a different path. If your peace depends entirely on things that can be lost, then your peace will always be temporary. So he begins building something that cannot be stolen: his character, his discipline, his integrity, his ability to remain calm when circumstances invite panic, his willingness to stand alone rather than betray what he knows is right. Little by little, he discovers that true strength is not found in controlling outcomes. It is found in controlling himself. He still has dreams. He still works hard. He still loves deeply. He still values meaningful relationships. But none of those things define his identity anymore. They enrich his life. They do not become the foundation of it. That is why he can celebrate success without becoming arrogant, accept failure without becoming hopeless, love without becoming dependent, lead without demanding obedience, walk away without becoming bitter, because his center no longer exists outside of him. And perhaps that is the greatest freedom a human being can ever experience. When nothing external owns your identity, nothing external can truly own your future. The world may take away your position, your money, your reputation, even the people standing beside you today. But as long as your character remains intact, the most important part of you can never be taken. That is why the man who seems to need the least often possesses the greatest wealth of all: a mind that cannot be manipulated, a heart that cannot be bought, and a soul that refuses to surrender its integrity for temporary rewards. That is not the power of a man who has everything. It is the quiet, unshakable power of a man who has finally realized that he already has enough within himself. Conclusion. The most dangerous man is not the one who has nothing. He is the one who is no longer owned by anything. When a man frees himself from the need for constant approval, fear, or attachment to things he cannot control, he discovers a strength that cannot be bought, borrowed, or taken away. The world may still challenge him, disappoint him, or misunderstand him, but it can no longer decide who he is. That quiet freedom is what makes him truly powerful. The lesson is simple, yet it can transform an entire life. Own your choices before you try to own success. Master your reactions before you try to influence others. Protect your character more carefully than your reputation, because reputation lives in other people's minds, but character lives within you. Every day, ask yourself one question: what is controlling my decisions today? Fear, approval, comfort, or my principles? The answer to that question will shape the man you become. If this message gave you a new perspective, subscribe to the channel and join a community of men committed to building wisdom, resilience, and unshakable character. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful content that inspires growth, self-mastery, and lasting inner strength. Thank you for taking the time to watch until the end of the video. See you in the next videos.